Imagine this: a frozen mountainside in the remote Ural Mountains of the Soviet Union. 9 young hikers, experienced and full of life, pitch their tent for the night. By morning, every one of them will be dead, some with injuries that defy explanation. Their tent is torn open from the inside. Their footprints lead into the darkness, barefoot in sub-zero temperatures, and no one alive ever saw them again. Over 60 years later, the Dyatlov Pass Incident remains one of the most baffling true mysteries of the 20th century. Was it an avalanche? A secret military experiment? Something stranger? Tonight, we'll walk you through the facts calmly, step by step, uncovering the evidence, the theories, and the haunting human story at the heart of it all. So, settle in, get comfortable, and let's journey together into the snow. But before we begin, if you love true crime told in a softer late-night style, make sure you hit subscribe and tap the like button. It helps more curious minds find their way here, and it lets me keep bringing you mysteries that keep us awake, or maybe lull us to sleep. High in the remote Ural Mountains of the Soviet Union, in the winter of 1959, a group of 9 experienced young hikers met a bizarre and tragic fate that has defied explanation for over 60 years. The event, now known simply as the Dyatlov Pass Incident, is one of the 20th century's most enduring wilderness mysteries. In this calm retelling, we'll journey back to that frigid February on Dead Mountain, as the local Mansi people call it, and carefully examine what might have happened. We will recount the expedition story, the discovery of the hiker's tent torn open and abandoned, the puzzling injuries found on some of the bodies, and the many theories that have been proposed, from the scientific to the sensational. Our tone will remain gentle and respectful, keeping in mind that these were real people, students and peers who tragically lost their lives. Through a measured review of the facts and hypotheses, we hope to illuminate why the Dyatlov Pass Incident continues to fascinate and mystify, yet do so without undue drama. In January 1959, a 10-member trekking team from the Ural Polytechnic Institute assembled for a challenging winter expedition in the northern Urals, then part of the Russian SFSR in the Soviet Union. The group was led by Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old radio engineering student and an avid outdoorsman. His team consisted of 8 men and 2 women, all in their early 20s, and all were experienced Grade 2 hikers, the second highest certification at the time. They aimed to reach Otorten, a mountain 110 kilometers north of their starting point, on a route categorized as Grade 3, the most difficult in winter conditions. They were well prepared with skis, tent, warm clothing, and provisions for about 2 weeks. Before leaving, Igor told colleagues they expected to return by February 12, 1959, barring delays. On January 27th, the team began their trek from a settlement called Vijay. The very next day, January 28th, one member turned back due to sudden illness, Yuri Yudin, who suffered rheumatic pains that flared up in the cold. Though disappointed, Yudin's decision saved his life. He would become the expedition's sole survivor in the sense that he lived on, and he would play a key role later in identifying items found at the site. The remaining 9 pressed on into the wilderness. Igor Dyatlov, 23, Zinaida Zina Kolmogorova, 22, Lyudmila Dubinina, 20, Rustem Slobodin, 23, Yuri Georgy Krivonishenko, 24, Alexander Kolovatov, 24, Nikolai Thibault Brignol, 23, Semyon Alexander, Zolotaryov, 37. Interestingly, an older and more mysterious addition who joined last minute, and Yuri Alexander Doroshenko, 21. Many of them were close friends. 2, Zina and Igor, perhaps had a budding romance. They kept diaries and took photographs along the journey, painting a picture of camaraderie and youthful enthusiasm despite the harsh conditions. For several days, the group skied and trekked through the taiga, boreal forest, and then into the rising foothills of the Ural Range. They followed along the frozen Lozva River up toward a highland area. Their route would eventually take them near a mountain named Kolet, which means dead mountain in the local Mansi language, a foreboding name that would later seem painfully apt. However, for the hikers, this was not ominous. They were mainly concerned with weather and navigation. By February 1st, 1959, diaries and recovered camera film indicate the team had made camp on the slopes of Kolet, around 5 kilometers from the summit. It appears they deviated slightly west of their intended path due to worsening weather, snowstorms, and low visibility, rather than move 1.5 kilometers downhill to a forested area that would have offered more shelter. Igor Dyatlov decided to pitch their large tent on an open area of the slope, possibly to practice camping on steep terrain, or simply because they didn't want to lose the distance they had covered. They cleared the snow and set up the tent, and according to diary entries, ate dinner sometime after sunset. All 9 crowded into the single tent, settling down for what they expected to be a routine, if cold, night. They did not know it would be their last. What exactly happened in the middle of that night remains the central mystery. The evidence, as discovered later by searchers, suggested that something or someone caused the hikers to cut or tear their way out of the tent and flee into the deadly cold, barely clothed. When the hikers didn't return to Vijay by February 12th as planned, there wasn't immediate alarm. Delays were common in expeditions. But by February 20th, families and colleagues pressured the Institute and local authorities to mount a search and rescue. It would take until February 26th for the first clues to be found. A student-led search party, flying in by helicopter and fanning out over the slopes of Kolet, spotted something protruding from the snow. It was the hiker's tent, collapsed, partially torn, and dusted with snow. The tent was empty. The sight that greeted searchers was puzzling and alarming. The tent fabric was found to be slashed open from the inside, as determined by later examination of the cuts. Nearly all the hikers' belongings, including their boots, cold weather coats, and several cameras and journals, were still inside. It was as if they had left in a great hurry, with absolutely minimal gear. Around the tent, investigators noted footprints in the snow, dozens of them, leading away downslope towards the edge of nearby woods, about 1.5 kilometers, a mile away. The prints were of stocking feet, bare feet, or feet in only socks. Some prints even showed the tread of one shoe. Perhaps someone had one boot on, one off. The tracks suggested that most, if not all, of the hikers fled together down the slope. They did not appear to be running in a chaotic sprint. The prints indicated a more controlled, though urgent, pace, as if they were fast walking or jogging, but not blindly panicked. This detail would later feed into theories. Whatever happened, the group left deliberately, but not necessarily in total disarray. Following the trail of footprints to the forest's edge, searchers made the first grim discoveries. Under the shelter of a large Siberian pine cedar tree at the forest boundary, they found the remains of a makeshift campfire and, tragically, the first 2 bodies. Yuri Krivonishenko and Yuri Doroshenko lay in the snow, shoeless and wearing only underwear, undershirts and shorts, despite temperatures estimated around minus 30 degrees Celsius that night. Their bare feet were badly frostbitten, and the branches above them were broken up to 5 meters high, possibly where they had tried to climb to look for the tent or snap branches for firewood. The evidence suggested these 2 had attempted to light a fire to survive. Nearby were charred sticks and twigs. On the bark of the pine tree, skin and tissue were found, indicating they had frantically tried to climb or hold on to the tree, perhaps scanning for their companions or the tent in the darkness, or to escape something. Both men had burns on their hands, likely from being close to or in the fire embers, and cuts and bruises on their bodies, but no fatal wounds. They likely died of hypothermia, their bodies succumbing to the brutal cold after their meager fire went out. Between this cedar tree and the tent site, searchers then found 3 more bodies at varying intervals, suggesting these individuals had tried, or were trying, to return to the tent, but never made it. Igor Dyatlov himself was found approximately 300 meters from the cedar, oriented towards the tent, face up in the snow, clutching a small birch tree branch in one hand. He was wearing a sweater, shirt, and pants, but no coat and only one boot. His watch had stopped at 5:31. Zina Kolmogorova was found a bit closer to the tent than Igor, also facing the direction of the tent, wearing perhaps slightly more clothing, a long-sleeve shirt, long underwear, but still not enough to endure the cold. Rustem Slobodin was found roughly midway between the cedar and the tent. Rustem, interestingly, had a small crack in his skull, a linear fracture, but it was assessed as not immediately life-threatening. He too likely froze to death. The poses of these 3 suggested they were crawling or staggering back uphill toward the tent when they collapsed one by one. Igor's head was toward the tent. Zina's was also pointed that way. Rustem was on his stomach as if mid-crawl. The distances between them and the tree implied they might have been attempting to regroup or reach supplies, but disoriented in the dark and blizzard and weakened by cold, they fell. It took over 2 more months, until early May 1959, for the remaining 4 hikers to be found. As the spring thaw set in, on May 4th, under snow in a ravine further into the woods, about 75 meters from the cedar tree, deeper into the forest, searchers discovered the last 4 bodies, those of Lyudmila Dubinina, Semyon Zolotaryov, Alexander Kolovatov, and Nikolai Thibault Brignol. They were found together in a sort of stream bed or ravine, under about 3 meters of snow. This group was better dressed than the others. Notably, some of them were wearing bits of clothing, apparently taken from the bodies of the earlier found dead. For example, Dubinina's foot was wrapped in a piece of Krivonishenko's wool pants, and Zolotaryov was wearing Doroshenko's fur coat and hat. This indicates that perhaps these 4 had survived longer than the others and had time and need to use the clothing of those who died first. They had crafted a snow den, evidence of an attempt to huddle and insulate themselves by digging into the snow on a slope for shelter and layering branches on the floor. But even more perplexing than their resourcefulness were their injuries. 3 of the 4 had suffered severe internal trauma that seemed inconsistent with simple hypothermia or a fall from a height. Nikolai Thibault Brignol had major skull damage. His skull was fractured so badly it was described as comminuted, shattered in pieces, as if from a high-impact car crash or a significant blow. Lyudmila Dubinina and Semyon Alexander Zolotaryov both had extensive chest fractures, multiple broken ribs, with such force that medical examiners said it would be equivalent to the impact of a car accident. Oddly, though, despite these devastating injuries, externally there were few signs of trauma, no open wounds or massive bruising on the torso, for example, which deepened the puzzle. It was almost as if they had been subjected to a high level of pressure or shock wave. Additionally, Dubinina was missing her tongue, part of her lips, and Zolotaryov was missing his eyes, as was one of the others who lay nearby. However, it's important to note these particular soft tissue injuries could have resulted from ordinary decomposition or scavenging by small animals, as the 4 bodies had been lying in running meltwater for weeks before being found. They were not necessarily evidence of violence or torture, though in the annals of Dyatlov lore, the missing tongue especially has fueled much speculation. One more curious detail: several of the clothing items recovered, e.g., Dubinina's brown sweater and some pants, were later tested and found to be radioactive, with higher than normal radiation levels. This was an odd finding that the Soviet investigators noted but did not dwell on publicly. It gave rise to theories about secret radioactive materials or weapons testing, but many years later it was considered that perhaps the clothes had picked up naturally occurring radioactivity from the environment, or been contaminated by where the students studied. Some were engineering students, who might handle radioactive isotopes in labs. Nonetheless, at the time, it became another perplexing data point. The Soviet authorities conducted a criminal investigation in 1959, led by a prosecutor named Lev Ivanov. They faced enormous pressure to determine a cause and close the case swiftly, likely due to the era's political climate, the Cold War, and an interest in quelling wild rumors. After compiling the autopsy results and scene evidence, the official conclusion, issued in May 1959, was that the hikers died due to a compelling natural force that they could not overcome. In other words, something non-human and presumably environmental caused the tragedy, but they stopped short of identifying exactly what. The case was then closed and the files classified, with no one held accountable. The area of the incident was sealed off for 3 years by the military, preventing further access. To outside observers, it felt like a cover-up, or at least a dismissal. Investigators privately were baffled. As Ivanov later admitted decades later, they could not explain what force caused such bizarre behavior and injuries. The phrase, compelling natural force, essentially meant the incident was ruled accidental, not a murder, blaming nature. But nature in what form? In the absence of survivors, the sequence of events on that night of February 1st to 2nd, 1959, remained unclear and hotly debated. With the case closed officially, rumors and alternate theories proliferated among the public and investigators who disagreed with the findings. Over the subsequent decades, countless theories, some plausible, some far-fetched, have been proposed to explain the Dyatlov Pass incident. We will examine the most significant ones calmly. Theory 1, the Avalanche or Slab avalanche theory. One of the leading explanations, favored by many researchers and recently supported by scientific studies, is that the hikers fell victim to a small avalanche that struck their tent. The idea is that, late on February 1st, perhaps as they slept, the combination of the snow they cut away and fresh snowfall created a slab of snow higher up that suddenly released and slid onto the tent. This would explain why they cut their way out in urgency. If the entrance was blocked or the tent partially collapsed by snow, slicing out would be the fastest exit. The roaring sound, the pressure on the tent, and a fear of being buried would have panicked them into leaving immediately, without time to dress. An avalanche could also potentially cause the severe injuries seen in the ravine victims if they were caught in it, or subsequently fell into the ravine with snow. It's noteworthy that the 2019 re-investigation by Russian authorities concluded an avalanche was the likely culprit, combined with hypothermia for the deaths. And in 2021, a study by scientists from Switzerland, EPFL and ETH Zurich, using models and even inspiration from animations in the Disney movie Frozen, demonstrated how a delayed slab avalanche, a block of snow sliding as a unit, could occur on the relatively mild slope around 30 degrees under the tent, given the right conditions. They showed that cutting into the slope to pitch the tent and the wind depositing snow could indeed trigger a slab hours later, quietly and without leaving obvious avalanche debris, matching the lack of clear avalanche signs at the scene. The slab could impact the tent with heavy snow, causing chest and skull injuries to those inside, particularly if some were lying down. It might not kill them outright, but injure some. The group may have then evacuated to safer ground, by the trees, and succumbed to cold because they couldn't return to the buried tent. This theory, while elegant, does have counterpoints. Skeptics note that footprints remain visible, perhaps unlikely if an avalanche had scoured the area, and the tent was not completely buried. However, these can be rationalized by the specific slab dynamics. A small slab that stopped at the tent, not a roaring full-depth avalanche. As of today, the slab avalanche combined with hypothermia is arguably the most scientifically grounded explanation. Theory 2. Katabatic wind. Another natural theory involves a katabatic wind, which is a sudden violent gust of cold air that can rush down slopes. Such winds have been known to occur in mountains and can be extraordinarily forceful and terrifying. Imagine in the dead of night, a howling wind that suddenly rips through, potentially collapsing the tent and making it impossible to stay in place. Hikers, fearing the tent might be destroyed or that they'd freeze if they stayed put, might have fled to the tree line for shelter from the wind. This could explain leaving in disarray, but doesn't directly account for injuries, except that in fleeing, some might have tripped or ran into trouble. A katabatic wind could also create a low-frequency noise and induce panic. Some tie this with a related theory of infrasound. Infrasound is sound below the range of human hearing that can cause feelings of nausea, dread, and panic. One theory posited that winds around the mountain created a Karman vortex street, producing infrasound that unsettled the hikers, triggering an irrational panic that made them flee the tent in a state of terror, undressing as they ran. Paradoxical undressing is a known late-stage hypothermia symptom some of them exhibited, but it's usually when already freezing. While interesting, this infrasound theory is quite speculative. It's hard to test and doesn't directly explain physical injuries. Theory 3. Military tests, parachute mines or rockets. The Ural Mountains in 1959 were remote, but not entirely empty. Some theories suggest the Soviet military might have been conducting secret weapons tests in the area, for example, dropping parachute mines, which explode above the ground, or launching test rockets. If a concussive blast occurred near the hikers, it could have scared them out of the tent, possibly thinking the area was being bombed. The shockwave from an airborne mine could potentially cause internal injuries like those seen, without leaving external wounds, similar to some injuries from bomb concussions in war. Supporting this, there were anecdotal reports from another hiking group 50 kilometers away of seeing strange orange orbs in the sky that night, which could have been flares or explosions. However, no official records of tests have been released for that date location. If it were a military accident, one might understand a cover-up, hence the quick closing of the case and vague verdict. But this remains unproven. The radiation on clothes is sometimes linked here. Maybe radioactive substances were in the weapons or rocket fuel, but the levels found were not high enough to be clearly from a blast. They might align with naturally accumulated radioactivity, or handling of radioactive lantern mantles, etc. The parachute mine theory is dramatic, and accounts for a lot: noise, panic, trauma, but lacks concrete evidence. Theory 4. Attack by Mansi or others. Early on, investigators considered whether local Mansi tribespeople, indigenous reindeer herders, might have attacked the group for trespassing on sacred land. However, the Mansi in the area were largely peaceful, and the investigation found no sign of hand-to-hand struggle, footprints of others, or any motive. The hikers' injuries did not look like those inflicted by other people. No knife wounds, for example. This theory was quickly dismissed and is not given weight by modern analysts. Similarly, the idea of escaped prisoners or a violent encounter with outsiders was considered. There were gulag camps in the region, but again, no evidence of other humans at the scene was ever found. Theory 5. animal attack, for example a bear or wolverine. A wild animal attack was postulated. Imagine a wolverine or bear sniffing around the tent, causing the hikers to slash the tent and run. But if a large animal were present, one would expect paw prints, and likely the animal would have harmed the hikers at the tree, or left some trace. No such evidence was noted. Also, most wildlife would be hibernating or scarce in the dead of winter. This theory doesn't align with the injuries or sequence either. Theory 6. Yeti or Menk. In the realm of sensational, one theory, popularized by a 2014 Discovery Channel show, suggested a Yeti, a Russian Almaz or snowman, attacked the group. This was spurred by one photo from a recovered roll of film that showed a dark humanoid figure among trees, very likely one of the hikers posing playfully. There is no real evidence for this, and it remains in the territory of folklore and internet memes. Theory 7. Interpersonal conflict. Could one of the hikers have had a psychotic episode or conflict that led to violence? The group's diary entries and behavior up to the last night show nothing indicating strife. All were close friends, except perhaps the older Zolotaryov, who was newer, but he was well liked, and no hint of trouble is recorded. Also, it's hard to imagine even a strong man like Zolotaryov inflicting the kind of chest-crushing injuries on others without a weapon or leaving visible trauma. No knife or gun wounds were found. Interpersonal violence seems an unlikely cause. If anything, the evidence suggests they were helping each other until the end, sharing clothes, etc. Given so many theories, the Dyatlov mystery turned into a bit of a legend. Over the years, enthusiasts have pored over documents, which were released in the 1990s, visited the site, and even attempted to recreate scenarios. The truth probably lies in a combination of factors. Perhaps an avalanche caused the initial flight, then confusion and hypothermia set in, possibly coupled with an injury or two from a fall or avalanche, and events cascaded tragically from there. The Dyatlov Pass Incident continues to captivate the public, both in Russia and worldwide. In 2019, partly in response to persistent public interest and some pressure from families, the Russian authorities formally reopened the case to apply modern analysis. They looked specifically at natural causes, ruling out crime, and in 2020 announced the avalanche hypothesis as the official cause in their modern report. They demonstrated through computer simulations and on-site studies how an avalanche could have occurred, and forced the hikers out into catastrophic weather conditions. This explanation satisfied many, but not everyone. Some researchers argue that the 2020 inquiry looked only at a narrow set of possibilities. Yet, in absence of clear contrary evidence, the scientific support for an avalanche and/or wind scenario is strong. On the other hand, the mystery has been the subject of countless books, documentaries, and podcasts that explore alternate angles, everything from secret Soviet cover-ups to UFOs. It has seeped into pop culture. There are fictionalized movies, like Devil's Pass, video games, Kolat, and even a segment on the History's Mysteries TV series. The reason the Dyatlov case endures is because it's like a real-life detective puzzle in the snow. 9 healthy people with high survival skills end up dead in incomprehensible ways. It sparks that fundamental human urge to find a narrative. What really happened on that mountainside? One cannot forget the human side amidst the theories. Friends and family of the hikers were devastated by the loss. In 1959, during the funerals in Sverdlovsk, today Yekaterinburg, fellow students were distraught, and rumors flew that the Soviet government was hiding something. The hikers were mostly in their early 20s, talented, and with bright futures ahead. For their loved ones, the pain was magnified by the lack of answers. Over the years, surviving relatives, like Igor Dyatlov's younger sister Tatiana and Yuri Yudin, who lived until 2013, continued to seek clarity and preserve the memory of the group. A foundation was established in their honor, and a simple memorial tombstone stands in Mihailovskoye Cemetery in Yekaterinburg, where most are buried side by side. The tomb has engraved portraits of the nine, youthful and smiling, a poignant reminder of real lives behind the mystery. The Dyatlov Pass Incident remains an intriguing mystery, but perhaps not an unsolvable one. As we have calmly traversed through the known facts and leading theories, a likely scenario emerges that is tragic yet not supernatural. The hikers were surprised by a natural event, like an avalanche or extreme winds, fled in urgency and darkness, became disoriented and separated, and fell victim to hypothermia, with some sustaining lethal injuries either from the initial event or subsequent falls. This explanation, though not as sensational as some, fits many pieces of the puzzle when examined closely. However, because no one survived to tell the tale, there will always be a space for wonder and doubt. That space has been filled by imaginations the world over, each generation posing new questions or new interpretations of old data. In retelling the story in a gentle way, we acknowledge the almost haunting quality of the Dyatlov mystery. It's a story set in a vast, indifferent wilderness, of human ambition meeting the raw power of nature. It reminds us how small we are against the elements, and how quickly things can go wrong even for the skilled and prepared. And yet, there's also something uplifting in how the hiking group fought to survive, helping each other till the end by sharing clothing and attempting shelters. They did not turn on each other. They faced the crisis together. Today, Dyatlov Pass, as the area near Kholat-Syakhl was later named in honor of Igor, is occasionally visited by adventurous trekkers and researchers. Most come away with a deep respect for the unforgiving environment. A photo of modern hikers at the pass often shows them bundled head to toe in cold weather gear against a backdrop of endless snow. It's humbling to stand where those nine stood and reflect on their final night. In the decades since, improved backcountry safety and communication might prevent similar tragedies. But the Dyatlov group didn't have those advantages. What they did have was courage, camaraderie, and love of exploration. We remember them not just as subjects of a mystery, but as vibrant young people who loved the mountains. In a sense, their story has achieved a sort of immortality. Their names are known worldwide, and their adventure, though ending in tragedy, continues to inspire both cautionary lessons and a spirit of inquiry. The Dyatlov Pass incident will likely never be 100% conclusively solved to everyone's satisfaction, and that's part of why it endures. But as we conclude our calm narrative, perhaps the best we can do is light a candle, like the one you might imagine flickering at their memorial, and hope that, whatever truly happened on that slope in 1959, the nine hikers rest in peace, and that we've learned something valuable from their story about nature's might and the importance of thorough, open-minded investigation.